Well, the Finance Bill 2023 continues to elicit mixed reactions. Some people are welcoming the proposals therein, and others are saying that the proposals are likely to burden an already burdened society. And so what is the way forward, even as we wait for the debate to start in the National Assembly? Well, that is a conversation we shall be having here, just to try and get the perspective from the experts. And so that is the show that you're going to, the show that we are going to have here from 11 to 12 p.m. Good morning and thank you very much for joining us. This is Bizcheck live from Broadcasting House. But before we get there, we also want to look at the TVET sector. You see, when you go through the Vision 2030, it talks about creating a robust technical capacity in Kenya, even as the country gears towards becoming an industrialized nation. You need welders, you need mechanics, you need engineers. And so there has been a deliberate effort by the government to try and reform the TVET sector in this country. So far, we have seen the creation of the TVET Authority, which is supposed to manage or regulate the TVETs in this country. We have also seen the Ministry of Education saying that they are planning to hire about 1,100 trainers in the next financial year. But of course, there's still some glaring challenges within these sector. And so the question is, how do we make our TVET institutions centers of excellence? Well, that is a conversation that we are going to have here. And also we are keeping tabs on what's happening elsewhere in the country. Our reporters are all over the ground. And of course, we shall be getting an update from Shakahola. You know, the horrors that are coming from that place, they are on another scale. The Commission of Inquiry has already been formed. It is expected to hit the ground running. And we also are keeping an eye on what's happening in the world of politics. The bipartisan talks got underway yesterday at the Bomas of Kenya. We'll be getting an update from there. But for now, we just want to have a look at the TVET education, the challenges and the opportunities therein. And joining us this morning is Gideon Morenga. He's the National TVET Coordinator working with GIZ Kenya. And he's joining us this morning to help us bring this conversation into light. So thank you very much, Gideon, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
So I want first of all to hear from you, what is the state of TVET in the country?
Thank you, Brian, also for giving me this opportunity to share some highlights about TVET. Ideally, TVET is a very important sector when you look at development of a country. And just as to your question on the status of TVET, I think for a long time the TVET subsector had been neglected, and I think a lot of interest was not on that area, and this is simply because there's a lot of push towards, once you complete your high school education, then you need to go to the university. Mm-hmm. And the TVET subsector in itself has always been looked into as, an area for those who did not do well to qualify to university, which is a very wrong misconception. Mm-hmm. So as it is, the government has put in enough efforts starting 2013 when the TVET Act was enacted. We have state agencies that are now in charge of supporting TVET reforms in Kenya, the TVET Authority, which I've just talked about. The push towards competency-based education, which is something that is now taking shape into the country, for everyone to be able to realize that TVET is designed in such a way that it's supposed to be flexible. You acquire competencies that enable you to easily integrate into the labor market. For example, you might, let's say, learn just a skill on installation, for example. Let's say light installation or electrical installation. That skill, once you have it, you can move it to the industry, and it can enable you to get a certificate for it, and it can enable you to start earning. So you don't have to complete the let's say courses that take a very long duration of time, and that's the purpose of when you talk about competency-based. You acquire competence, mm-hmm. then you can be certified on that competence, and that competence gives you the skill for you to start practicing mm-hmm. already in the industry. So I think there are already tremendous efforts done towards reforming TVET in the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there is a point that you have touched, and which has been the reality in this country, that technical and vocational institutions, they are for people who failed in their examinations, which is a misconception, because when you look at countries like Germany, Switzerland, Norway, you know, their vocational training is considered to be one of the highest, you know, achievement that you can have, and it is always a sure bet for you to get a job, a job in the job market. But when you look at here in Kenya, we somehow view people who have gone through, you know, vocational training as people who failed in the academic endeavors. How do we change these, honestly?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, and that's the reality. I think for a long time, you know, TVET is being associated with blue-collar jobs. You know, you look at mechanics, you look at, you know, the kind of dress codes they have. You know, for us, I mean, they are PPEs. So when somebody looks at it, they imagine like this is a dirty job kind of, you know, course that I want to do. And I think also it was not positioned very well in terms of the values that come out of the TVET system. Exactly the way you have put it is that countries like Germany, for example, some of these cars we take pride of here in Kenya, like the German machines and many others. When you look at the guys behind, you know, coming up with this innovation, actually majority of them have gone through the dual TVET system in Germany. So I think it was not positioned very well, and that's why it led to that change of perception. So when you talk about TVET, then somebody says, no, this is a thing for those who did not make it to university. And this misconception has also been created by, I think, even some of the leaders, for example. When you communicate about, yeah, this and this kind of students have qualified to go to university, but the rest can go into the TVET. By using that statement alone, you're already creating a misconception by it. Because what we're saying is that TVET is an alternative pathway. So you can take an academic line where you want to go to university, or you can decide to take a TVET pathway. Because when you go through the TVET pathway, you acquire skills and competencies, more of the hands-on skills, as compared to the one probably going through the university who you're probably looking at management. But when you look at the structure of an industry, how many managers can you have? But you need so many technicians along the line.
And I like the fact that you're bringing in the issues of, you know, even high-end products. And for example, even the, you know, the most sophisticated machineries, you know, that we have around. Talk about the vehicles, talk about electric vehicles, mobile phones, computers. There's an element of technical training that is required there.
Absolutely.
And so it is proper to say that, you know, you can't have a situation whereby all the graduates in Kenya are aiming for white-collar jobs. And that's why we have, you know, even universities, technical training institutes, and other institutions whose responsibility is to train people for the blue-collar jobs, because the two must coexist. And so how then do we bring about, you know, a positive image around technical trainings in this country?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I think one of the things is to demonstrate the success that has come out of TVET training. And one of the ways that you know, we can look into this is ensuring that the industry is part of the TVET training. Because you are actually, the TVET training does not train for its own absorption, but it trains for the absorption of the labor market. And therefore, the labor market, which comprises of the industry, needs to come together and work with these TVET education systems. With that, that means relevance, issues of relevance of education will be addressed. And if these issues are addressed, it means the transition of these young people, once they come out of TVET colleges to the labor market, will be increased. And once the society, once the community is able to see that there is a smooth transition of young people into the labor market, then it makes it easy for people to change their perception, even for the parents to change their perception. Because ideally, when you look about transition into the labor market, you have to look at myself as a company. For example, I am going to employ a TVET graduate. Is he going to meet my productivity needs? For example, do I need to invest again in retraining this young person? So those are some of the challenges that then makes it difficult for these young people. Once they have completed training, they are not able to transition to the labor market. So if we can address the issue of relevance, parents will be able to see and the entire country will be able to see the value of this. And I think it also gives value to the industry, because as you've talked about Vision 2030 and with its objectives, it's the Kenya's development blueprint. For us to meet those industrialization target, it means we need to have a competent workforce.
Yeah.
And for us to have a competent workforce, it means we have to invest in training these young people. So once we're able to have competent people transitioning into the labor market, getting decent jobs into the labor market, then it's very easy for the perception aspect also to be changed. And I think also branding. How well do we brand these TVET institutions compared to universities, for example? How many times do we talk about these TVET institutions? So if we only talk about them in terms of, those who did not make it to university, then everybody feels that, this is, it is cut out for the ones who did not do well in school.
Mm-hmm. And when you look at this, this space that we call technical and vocational education, do you see a deliberate effort by the government to try and reform this industry and formalize, even the examinations and the qualifications that are acquired through these institutions?
I think yes. I think there are various efforts that have been done by the government. For example, the TVET Act 2013 proposed the establishment of the Kenya National Qualification Authority. The Kenya National Qualification Authority has established levels of qualification from level 1 all the way to level 10. For example, if you're a PhD, you're level 10, degree is level 7, diploma is level 6, for example. It means they are already mainstreaming the qualifications of TVET into the main qualification system in the country. Because one of the other challenges that has also led to the perception, negative perception, has been that, let's say, transition to higher learning. The progression to higher learning. Mm-hmm. Because most of the people feel that if I go to TVET, what happens after I've completed my diploma? Not everyone who goes to the TVET institution wants to go to the labor market. There are those who wants to progress to higher learning, up to university, up to degree. So without a proper framework, then it's not easy to achieve this. So I think that's one of the efforts the government have done. By having that qualification framework, it means it provides a very clear guidelines. If I go to the TVET system, then I'm able to progress to higher learning. I think the other issue is also around financing. I think you saw the changes that have just happened with regard to financing of TVET and higher education, which is promoting equity and inclusivity. So those who are vulnerable and those who are extremely needy, it means they're able to get support from government, and that means they're able to access education. Because financing, for sure, TVET education is expensive to run. Because of the cost of equipment, the cost of a workshop, it's an expensive affair. Mm-hmm. So I think on the financing, that the government has done a lot on that, and also recently with the hiring of trainers as well. So with the effort to add more qualified trainers into the system, it means the government is really focused on making the TVET system, pushing it to the next level. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you have brought this issue about, career progression, and a lot of people, the misconception that we have is about that if you go to a technical training college, the highest qualification you can get out of it is a certificate. Mm-hmm. Is this true? And is it possible for you to progress up to PhD level, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is very true. Yes, it is very easy to progress to higher levels of learning when you go through the diploma qualification. I think, as I mentioned, what was missing before was the qualification framework. Mm-hmm. Because the qualification framework then enables you to know, once I'm able to meet this number of training hours and so on at this level, and I get my, let's say, level 5 qualification, or I get my level 6 qualification, then I can be able to progress to university, which it now takes you to level 7 and the other levels. So yes, that has been a misconception, which it's very important for the public to know that TVET system right now does not create dead ends, but it's established in such a way that there's vertical permeability. Mm-hmm. You can rise along the system and still progress up to the highest level of qualification. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how do you progress after securing or after scoring low grades in your high school examinations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's sometimes people describe it as, starting on lane 6 or lane 5 or lane 4 when you're taking a race. So you've only started on a different level. That means you have to meet some, let's say, pre-qualifications before you go to that level. So that's why when you look at even requirements to join, for example, some courses, one of the requirements would be you have met this qualification in high school or you have a diploma in this particular area. But the one who went through the diploma probably had a lower qualification. The other thing is when you look at the qualification framework, and that's something that has been worked on, the pathway for TVET graduates usually, depending on the courses, can be slightly different, where the highest level you come up with somebody called a master craftsman. So a master craftsman will give you the highest qualification when it comes to a TVET system, which then if you do the equation, so you would say it is equivalent to probably a master's degree holder who has gone through an academic unit of qualification. So there's a very clear framework that is provided for you to be able to progress even when you go through a TVET system. Yeah.
What about, and I know that, in January, the KCSE results were out, or actually in December, and, some people qualified to go, to progress to universities, others to colleges, to technical colleges. But we also had people who did not qualify to join high schools. They didn't score the proper grades to allow them to join high schools. Do they have a future? Absolutely.
They have a future. I think the way the education, let's say, system is designed, it has an avenue for everyone. Actually, what we say is that those who qualified, we can't say they failed. They were just not right, academically. But these are the people, when you subject them to hands-on activities, they will do very well. So they did not fail, but they will go through an alternative pathway of learning where now TVET comes in. Yes, so they have a very bright future, and something special about skills, which majority of people do not know. When you go through a university degree, you get your qualification. Apart from those, let's say, highly specialized areas, you come up with a certificate, but a lot of times you find that most of the people come out of that lack the hands-on practical experience. Now the TVET system now provides you that hands-on practical experience. And what I know, even some of the companies that are really hands-on, industrialized, for example, when you go for the interview, they actually subject you to a kind of a scenario test for you to work on something, for them to clarify you as competent or not competent. So you see, if a TVET graduate goes into that interview and a graduate goes into that interview, then a TVET graduate will do better than them. So they have a future. That is the answer.
But you see, again, also how the Kenyan job market is structured is that the minimum qualification is always, even when companies are hiring, the minimum qualification is always, a KCSE certificate. Before now, they can build on your professional qualifications. And so for somebody who never went beyond class 8, but they went through vocational training, and, they're qualified, they're very qualified, and they are skillful, and, the job that is demanded, they can do, then don't you think we have also created a system whereby no wonder people who have gone through that system are seen to be like failures?
Absolutely, and that is one of the things that I think, as much as we are changing the entire perception, we also look at the employment world as well. Because I think the employers, not all of them have been able to embrace qualifications of this nature. Because yes, the framework provides an avenue for even this guy who did not access secondary school to go through a vocation qualification, though it might take a different pathway. But but
eventually all of them will be qualified.
Absolutely, all of them will be qualified. So this other guy will be qualified in terms of hands-on. If you need things to be done, hands-on things, this guy will do it better. The other graduate is more of management, and that's why the graduates move to the management aspects when it comes to the employment space. So I think also the perception need to change also from the employer's side. If I am presenting a competency-based qualification, the employers need to understand what does that mean. Because right now, even in terms of certificate, most employers know a NEC certificate. But if you say you are taking a different kind of a certificate, let's say a CBET qualified certificate or a partial certificate, which is part of a competency-based training certificate, most of them will not understand. So I think also one of the things that needs to happen is a lot of sensitization also to the employment world, for them to understand with these new changes in TVET, what does it mean? What kind of qualification will they be meeting from graduates? And if a graduate presents this kind of certificate, a CBET certificate, what does that mean? So I think a lot of sensitization needs to be done on that.
And I like the fact that you're saying that, both of them, the person who went through vocational training and the person who went through, high school, university route, I mean, at the end of the day, in terms of skills, both of them will be qualified at the end of the day. But it's just a question of, for example, you have a situation where two people are going to let's say Lamu. Somebody decides to take the Mombasa Road route all the way to Voi, Mombasa, all those places. And then you have somebody else who decide to take the Garissa.
The Garissa route. Yes, yeah, and Tana River.
Yes, it could be one of the highways could be longer, but both of them are highways.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, they will take you to Lamu, though you took different routes.
Yeah.
And so how do we convince people that, yes, we only know of Mombasa Road to get you to Lamu. But hey, look here, there is also an alternative, which is the Garissa Highway, but eventually these people will end up in Lamu. So how do you convince employers that these two people are qualified for the job?
Yeah, I think one is to demonstrate the qualifications that come out of TVET graduates as an alternative pathway, exactly the way you have put it, because then the Garissa route is the alternative pathway to Lamu. So looking at TVET as an alternative pathway to career progression, to education progression and learning, to demonstrate the results. If the people come out of the system are able to be productive, are able to, let's say, exhibit a highest level of performance within the workplace, then it is very easy for even an employer to say, I employed these 3 TVET graduates the last couple of years. I have seen these are their results. I employed 3 others from the university. I've seen these are their results. Then when they make a comparison, they can be able to tell, oh, yeah, I think these guys are better when it comes to hands-on and practical things. And when I want to push my productivity, especially if I'm a manufacturing company, for example, then I know this is the guy I'm going for. So if we can be able to demonstrate those results, it's very easy for the perception to change, because it's about results. I see it, I employ, I see their performance, then I'm able to make judgment on that. Yeah.
Is there an economy that can develop without TVET institutions and people who have gone through TVET qualification and training?
I don't think so. Especially looking at a country like Kenya, which is a developing economy, for us to achieve our aspirations, we have to work with the TVET systems. For us to achieve our industrialization agenda, we have to work with the TVET system. Because the advantage of TVET is that you're able to develop, let's say, short programs that meet certain needs within the labor market. I'll give an example. During COVID-19, for example, some of the issues and challenges that were there was production of masks, for example, or sanitizers. There are TVET institutions that I know in Kenya that started a small training on how to produce, for example, sanitizer, and some of them even went ahead to produce these sanitizers, and they were able to push them into the market. So TVET has the capability of, whenever there is a change, because one of the realities also that is happening is there are 3 major changes happening globally. Demographic change of the population. We have digitalization. We know the changes that are happening with AI and so on. When you look at all these kind of changes, it means we have to keep abreast with these changes. So every time you'll always need to come up with a qualification or a training that meets the needs of what, the changes that are happening. Climate change is the other thing. You're not talking about green jobs, renewable energy. You're talking about, issues around waste management, for example. The unit that can enable you to come up with short qualification around that area is the TVET ecosystem. So So you cannot be able to work, especially as a developing country, without the TVET system. Yeah.
And when you look at funding, for example, through the Higher Education Loans Board, the fact that now even TVET and vocational training students, they can access help is a testament that, the government has come to realize that as an economy, we cannot function properly without the services of TVET and vocational training. And so I want you to guide people, on how to go about this, because I know there are a lot of people, who are seated at home or they're at school, they're watching this program, and they would want to pursue a career through technical trainings and vocational centers. So how do they go about this?
Yeah, I think the provisions of that are very clear. First of all, the courses around TVET are usually marketed either by the institutions themselves or through the Kenya Universities and Central Placement Service. That is COOPS, popularly known as COOPS. So mostly these courses are advertised, and students have room to go and check a course that they would like to apply for. Then they are able to make the applications. Once they're able to make the application, I think there are procedures in terms of how do they apply, let's say for Higher Education Loans Board funding. Those provisions are there. And I think it's good also for the public to be abreast with the new guidelines with regard to financing, where there's a categorization of the different students joining a college, and just know which category do they fit in. There's a very clear process on how to categorize the students in terms of the 4 levels. Then after that, they are able to make the applications and know what kind of support they can be able to get. But ideally, the government has promoted access. That means everyone can be able to access education. You could be at a university, you could be at a TVET education, but we need to have a skilled workforce. And this skilled workforce is what will increase, let's say, the employability of young people. Maybe that's why I can talk about the program we are doing, if you can allow.
Yeah.
The dual TVET program, which is one of the programs that is really promoting the employability of young people in Kenya, because the program brings together private sector industries together with the TVET institutions to implement a TVET training program. So it started in Kenya in 2019 until 2020. We are just starting a new phase of the project this year until 2026, jointly financed by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, and is together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. So it's a joint co-financing for the project. And ideally, the goal is to ensure we implement a dual TVET program that is oriented towards the requirements of the industry. So we're actually doing a launch of that program today in the evening. We expect a very high delegation to come and join us in the launch of the program, because it has very good structures in terms of how it's going to be implemented the next 4 years, targeting 6,000 TVET graduates, 60 TVET schools nationally, spread all the way from let's say Mombasa all the way to Kisumu and Siaya regions. And within that program, we expect that we'll have about 800 companies that will join to be able to support the program. And from the pilot that we did between 2019 and 2022, we have about 35 companies that supported the program and actually supported the TVET trainings that we were working with, which is Nairobi TTI, Thika TTI, we have Kiambu Institute of Science and Technology, we have Bumbe TTI in Busia, RIAT in Kisumu, Kerubo Gietai in Nyamira, we have Kitale National Polytechnic. And out of these 35 companies, from the students they took to mentor, ideally the graduates that are completing, the first graduates are completing in July, and about 90% have confirmed slots to be taken up to be employed by the companies they have trained in, which is a really proof that this model works. And when you ask the companies, why are you willing to take in this graduate, they say they have trained with us, they know our culture. We don't need to retrain them. I give them a contract in the morning. At 10, they are working. I don't need to induct them for another 3 or 4 weeks. So when you look at the issues of cost saving also on the companies, for them to be able to, to find value out of the people they employ is making sure they invest very less in terms of retraining you, or not invest at all in your retraining, but they want to employ you and you start working and you can be able to demonstrate your productivity.
You know, the dual model of training, you know, has been very successful in Germany, where institutions of learning, they collaborate with the job market, whereby students are interned in these in these companies. And so you don't end up with some sort of a training mismatch, because that has always been a big challenge in this country. Every year, our institutions of higher learnings, they are producing almost 1 million job seekers. But the challenge has always been the kind of training they have gone through vis-a-vis the job market requirement. You know, there has always been that skill gap. And so when you look at that dual model, do you believe this is a system that can be implemented here in Kenya in a bid to deal with a job with a skill gap crisis?
Absolutely. I think dual model is the way to go, and exactly the way you've put it. Countries like Switzerland, Austria, Germany have implemented this model successfully before. And why I believe the model would work: one, it addresses the issues of skills mismatch. Now, we don't have a situation where graduates go through a training system. Once they leave, the employer says, no, they do not have the skills that we need. So you actually put the employers on the driver's seat. And from the pilot that we did between 2019 and 2022, actually the companies that we are working with are the ones that developed the curriculum. They led to the development of the curriculum. That means the content that is being trained in those institutions, the 7 institutions I've talked about, is content from the industry. Now, again, there are revisions of this curriculum where the companies come and say, for example, I'll talk about e-mobility, for example, the electric vehicles and the e-vehicles. This is now a new technology that is coming in. Already we are revising the automotive mechatronics curriculum that is offered at Nairobi TTI to incorporate the modules on e-mobility. And e-vehicles. Why? Because the company have said we are transitioning towards that. The other thing why I think the model works, we have a quite developed let's say private sector industry in Kenya with the willingness to support TVET education. And the 35 companies that we work with are an example of the companies that are willing to support TVET education. I'll give an example. We went to the program running at Ekerubo Gietai in Nyamira, Ekerubo Gietai TTI. It's a course on plant mechanics with a focus on the tea sector. Now, the companies that we're working with are 11 companies under Kenya Tea Development Authority in Nyamira. Now, what these companies did, they led the process of even getting the students to join the program. They even went ahead to finance for the training costs of these students. So when you even talk about that private sector are not willing to support financing, that is wrong, because KTDA companies in Nyamira actually supporting financially the students who are being trained at Ekerubo Gietai TTI. And that is evidence that why they want to get competent, qualified young people from the TVET education system. So for me, when you look at the model that it works, yes, it will work. It will have its challenges, of course, because our private sector industries are not used to that kind of model of working. When you look at other countries, you find that even students are paid some kind of stipend when they go to the training in the industry. In Kenya, some of the companies are doing that, the ones in the pilot phase already. Over time, with sensitization and companies seeing value, because for a company, it's not their core business to train. They have their core business. So you have to demonstrate, why do I need to partner with this institution? What value do I get out of it? So once it's very clear value for money for the private sector industries, they will support the TVET system, and the dual model will work very well. Yes.
Well, if you're just joining us, we're having a conversation around the role of private sector in promoting the growth of TVETs in this country. We're in the company of Gideon Morenga. He's a national coordinator at GIZ Kenya, which is a German financial assistance institution. And the conversation that we are having here is how to champion the growth of TVET institutions in Kenya, and how do we model these institutions and fashion them for economic development, because the fact of the matter is they are critical for the development of this economy. They are actually mentioned in the Vision 2030, whereby it talks about rebranding these institutions, refinancing them, and of course ensuring that you have the technical know-how when it comes to training to ensure that they are primed for 21st century jobs. And that is the conversation that we're having here. And Gideon, before we proceed further, I want to hear from you. You see, when you look at a lot of the technical institutions as well as vocational training centers, they are equipped with technology that is not relevant in today's market, because today's market is looking for highly mechanized trainings. You're talking about artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. You're talking about electric vehicles and so much. But when you look at our institutions, the kind of technology that they are training our students on belongs to 1980s, 1990s, yet we expect them to get employment today. And so how do we go about this?
Thank you, Brian, for that. So what you've said is true and is not true. Why I'm saying it's true and not true is that there has been a lot of changes in the TVETs, let's say, last couple of years. When you go, actually, some of the TVET institutions in this country, if you visit some of their workshops, there are some that have the best equipment, even better than some of the universities we have in Kenya. There are some institutions that have modernized very well, let's say, equipped workshops, better than even some universities in Kenya. So I think the issue has always been, there's been that general misconception without knowing the reality of what happens there. But when you visit them, you realize that. Maybe the only challenge will have been proper utilization of this equipment. Something else will be, do the trainers have the practical know-how on how to utilize the equipment, for example? That is one of the challenges that could probably be coming in. But again, is not all, but majority now are having very modernized equipment. When you talk again about infrastructure and equipment, so when you do, let's say when you focus on trainings for these young people, and what is happening in the TVET, now they are being encouraged to become income generating. To create income generating units within the TVET systems using the equipment that they have. Already there are those that have started. So that means they are partnering with the local society, for example, to create some production units within what they have within the facilities. I know institutions that even have garages that service vehicles for customers, including even some government agencies. That is happening. So the reality on what you have said is that yes, the change of technology is quite fast. So the question would be, how fast will TVET institution be able to change the equipment with the change of technology? I think that will be the challenge that we'll be talking about. Because let's say you've invested 20 million equipment in this institution on automotive engineering, for example. 3-4 years down the line, the technology has changed. You need a different kind of equipment. That becomes the challenge. And that is why within the dual training, the partnerships with the companies support this. So you have the equipment that you train on while in the TVET school. Then when you go to the industry block, you are able to get exposed to the latest equipment and technology that is available. So that means you use whatever is in the institution, but then you go to the TVET, to the company, to get exposed to the latest technology and equipment that they have. I'll give an example how the model that, the dual TVET model that the Ministry of Education is actually the main implementing partner in this project. And the way it is designed is that students alternate in blocks. So let's say you're doing a diploma 3-year course. The first term you report in school, the second time you go to the industry, the third term you go back to the school. The following year, term 1, you go to the industry again. So you alternate. By the time you complete your 3-year program, 50% of your training has taken place in the industry. And in the industry, you have an industry mentor who is actually guiding you through what needs to be done within the workplace. So when you look at that kind of student, as much as he could have some not very good, let's say, advanced equipment within the TVET school, but 50% of the training has taken place in the industry. So they are actually exposed to the latest equipment and technology in the industry. And that's why dual training comes in as a solution for that. Yeah.
And I like the fact that, it is very true that, despite the fact that you still have some institutions whose equipment and technology is outdated, we have seen significant investment in trying to modernize our TVET institutions. And when you look at, even the government, the dual model, the dual training model can really work because you have so many government institutions that are in the manufacturing and the processing of items and products. For example, you have in the sugar industry, you have Mumias, you have Nzoia, you have Chemelil. In the textile industry, you have Rivertex, you have Kikomi. And these are institutions where this dual model system, can be implemented. And it will serve two purposes. Number one is going to help the trainers, acquire the relevant skills. And number two, it is going to ensure that there is steady supply of workforce to these state-owned institutions.
Absolutely.
So how comes the government has not, tried to work on that kind of a model?
Yeah, thank you for that, Brian. I think the model is new. Let me say that because from the pilot that the JZ project started in 2019, there were just a few institutions that this model was being implemented in. But as it is now, I can assure you that the government has taken it up. Right now, there's a process of developing a dual TVET policy under the Ministry of Education, State Department of TVET. And once this policy is in place, it's at its draft stage at the moment, and therefore in the next couple of weeks or months, we expect the policy to be approved and to be operational. And of course, then once it becomes a policy, it means that it provides a regulatory framework for any institution and private companies to come together and be able to implement the dual model. But some of the companies are already doing it. I've already given an example of KTDA, for example. They are doing it very well in Nyamira, in the tea sector, for example. In Nairobi, we also have a good number of companies that are already doing the dual model. For example, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola have taken in 3 cohorts of students since the program began. And they are very happy about the program. It's giving them the skills they need because they're actually taking part of training. We have companies like Krones. We have companies like Kappa Oil, for example. They are Capwell Industries, for example. These are companies that are already, big companies are already, taking part in this model. And it's not just the big companies. We have small companies as well. You can categorize them, let's say, small, medium enterprises. For example, we have a company called Top Quality Motors. It's a garage along Thika Road. They have taken in students in 2 cohorts, for example. So they take in a few, but they see value in investing in developing a competent workforce for the country. Kenya Vehicle Manufacturers in Thika, for example, in one of their cohorts, they took in 11 students, and they have mentored them in a very committed way. For the last 3 years until the students are completing their course this year. So ideally, the interest is there. Slowly by slowly, more companies are coming on board because they are seeing the value of that. CMC Motors, for example. CMC Motors has branches all over the country. I think right now, if I estimate, they have about 56 students 56 students, because they do their projections.
That is just one company.
One company. They do their projection in terms of the skills they need. Then they take in these students. So they know by the time they're completing, the need to get them on board, will have been achieved. So the interest is there. I think the more companies come on board, the more easier it will become to implement this model. But yeah, I think the companies that are already on board are already seeing value out of this training. New KCC, New KCC has about 36 or 37 students spread across from their branch in Mombasa all the way to Western Kenya. They have students in the program that are training in the dual training. In fact, one of them in Mombasa branch is partnering with an institution in Kisumu, RIAT. So the student is learning theory in RIAT in Kisumu. During the company blocks, he goes to Mombasa for training. So the interest is there.
So the dual training system is being embraced by many companies. Gideon, before we wind up, I also want to hear from you. Look, out of the 100 students who graduate from primary school and secondary school, you have about 40% of them will get positions in universities, and so you have about 60% who do not attain that qualification to allow them to get to university.
No.
Do we have enough technical training institutions in this country that can absorb the 60%?
Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you for that. I think the capacity is there, or progressively is going to be achieved. There was this objective some time back of establishing one TVET college per constituency, and a number of TVET colleges were actually established. When you go to some of these TVET institutions, apart from the ones, let's say, in the urban centers and the ones that started a long time ago, you'll find that the students' population is still very low. It means that even the capacity that we have has not been utilized enough. So, and this goes back to the issues of misconception and the negative perception that is seen towards TVET. So I think we have capacity. The current TVETs have not yet been fully utilized. I think when these are utilized, then it is very easy to project and see how many institutions can further be established. But when you look at it in terms of generally, even from the private ones and the public ones that are in existence, we have a good number of TVETs that can absorb that kind of need from the students.
Very good.
Yeah.
And so it is up to our students and parents and guardians to take up that initiative and ensure that, their students or their children, they're enrolled in these institutions, because there's a guarantee that by the time you're through with your training, you get a job.
Absolutely.
Very good. Yeah. Gideon, asante sana for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And of course for helping us with that insight around TVET institutions.
Thank you for having me.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. Enjoy your morning.
Asante.
Very good. Gideon Morenga is National TVET Coordinator working with GIZ Kenya, joining us this morning to help us understand how do we remodel our TVET institutions and prime them for economic development, because they have an integral role to play to ensure that the technical job market in Kenya is sufficiently supplied with qualified and competent workforce. And you have heard it all from him. You're watching Bizcheck. We're taking a short break, and thereafter the conversation around the Finance Bill 2023 is coming up next. Stay right here.